that? Anybody want to speak to that briefly? Because I think that's one of the questions is fourth grade the right assessment grade level for science?
There's the potential, based on the NAEP test every other year,
Right.
for our fourth graders to test reading, math, science, and take the NAEP in the same year. Not to mention anything you do in your school as far as map testing or STAR assessment or something like that.
So again, the NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, is given every other year, odd number years,
Yep.
13, 15, 17. At grade 4, grade 8, and so you're now doubling up on those odd number of years. Not only are you doing NAEP, you're doing state assessment, reading and math, and you're doing science. So the question would be, is fourth grade the right grade for science?
And typically the NAEP occurs in January or February. We do our science testing in the fall. If we do NAEP in February, and then we start state assessment in March or April, it gets to be a process all year long.
And if you're talking about instructional time at grade 4, there's a fair amount of interruptions
Yep.
there.
Yeah.
Any other elementary folks want to weigh in on?
I would just agree. It's kind of, teach fourth grade, you don't want to assess
After Christmas.
Right.
Yeah, right. Okay, good.
It's ditto, fourth grade, they get hammered, and they know it, and if it's an 8th year, they know it's constant from fall, it's interruption, and then, if you throw in the practice test, and then that's not even talking our interim, math tests, which are fall, winter, spring.
Okay. So as you think about your role lights this afternoon, one of the challenges you're going to have is to talk about where should the science assessment be if fourth grade isn't the right assessment.
May I ask a question? The NAEP test, where is that required? I'm assuming it's required.
Yep.
optional.
It's an optional, it's
My
required.
understanding is it's optional, but the governor has asked it.
Well, and I'm a NAEP ambassador, so I work with 13 states on the NAEP assessment. And while it's not required, you could lose your Title I funding if you don't take it. And also, it's the only measure that Kirsten has to say every state in the country, how do we stack up? It's called the Nation's Report Card, the only assessment that everybody gets. So it really is a valuable tool for a state to say, there's only one test we can look to if we want to compare ourselves to the other 49 states.
And I would say that is a test that I think the value is to our legislative branch and our governor's branch. It does not provide much information to the department even.
It doesn't even have school and district.
It doesn't have school or district. It doesn't help me distribute funds, but it truly is extreme. It's what our legislative branch always looks at and always asks me about.
Question or
I
comment?
just want to clarify, not all the students take the NAEP, right?
Correct.
It's almost a random sampling, even within one school, correct?
Yes, but in small rural states, a lot of them take it.
We take it, all fourth grade. I mean, the way it's assigned is they come in and they take our list and they say, okay, your math, your reading,
Okay,
your
I
math,
knew there
your
was something
reading.
Yeah.
random about
So
it.
that's random.
Not every fourth grader will take both
It's a
tests.
test.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
You
But they'll
take
test.
math and read, and that part's random, so we don't know until they show. And as far as the teacher load, it's very minimal. They show up, they come in with their people, they run it, they administer it, but we don't know until that morning whether reading math. So that part's very random. So as far as the
Good-
teacher
good
impact, it's
question.
very minimal except for time away from instruction.
And keep in mind, the NAEP is not negotiable. They can't move that to a different grade level. That's going to be a fourth grade. So
And
the
that
question
something-
is,
And that is something that you would need to take up with our legislative branch
Yeah.
and our governor.
Right.
This is,
right.
that's not a department.
Yeah. So anyway, so 3 through 8 content, crystal clear reading and math. The question is, where does science belong in
And
elementary?
that's going to be on 8 as well, because
Yes.
4 and 8 get
Yes,
double hit with
exactly.
science and 8.
Yeah, interestingly, you test science 4 and 8. NAEP is given 4 and 8. So you match the NAEP grade levels with your science assessment. So you're going to want to
8 is
consider both of those. 3 through 8 item types. ASG, the group that's going to talk to us at 11 o'clock, is going to speak better than I can to this. But and I have to admit, I didn't give you enough good information ahead of our December discussion. But there's a difference between computer-based testing, CBT, which means you sit down and take the test on the computer, and a computer-adapted, CAT, which means as you complete the exam, the questions differ based on your answers and your abilities. So ASG, the group, have I thrown enough acronyms at you yet? So ASG is going to talk to us at 11 about the difference between computer-based testing and computer-adapted testing. And then I want you this afternoon to be thinking, what do we want for our North Dakota students? Do we want computer-based testing, which tends to be kind of a fixed exam? Everybody takes the same exam on a computer, versus computer-adaptive testing, which is the smarter I am, or the more capable I am, the higher I will go in my level of questioning. And there's a difference there. And Greg, am I okay there in my explanation? And if I'm not, jump in, because I want to make sure they get the right information.
No, that's pretty darn good.
Yeah, okay. I think that was similar to his comment to Kirsten earlier. Which is, I did hit it out of the park, but it wasn't a complete swing and miss. Okay, all right. And then the other one was multiple choice versus constructed response. And there was that was what your predominant message is a combination of multiple choice and some constructed response. Again, I don't mean to keep picking on Greg, but I suppose the more constructed response you have, the longer it takes to assess and score, and the slower the results are in coming back.
Yeah, if I can.
Yep, absolutely.
I sit in the cheap seats and I just watch.
That's fine.
But I've tried to listen very carefully to the expressions of understanding and frustration. When a student takes a test, that test is effectively touched 3 times for scoring purposes. The first time is when a selective response, which is basically, can you choose from this or that? You can score that, and the computer scores that on the fly. And it determines from that score what your next item is going to be based on a predetermined formula of the probability of you being able to meet it or not. That's the first step. The second phase is, once you have all those done, you have your constructed response items. That's when the student actually is writing whatever they're doing. That's scored in one of 2 ways. Some of those are straightforward that can be done in machine code, but most are, by and large, go in front of a human scorer. The human scorer is trained to work within very tight parameters of how you get a point or how many points based on that score. But the third part of it is when you put it all together. And this is the thing that causes people to kind of get confused. There is a point when all of the constructed and all of the selective items are put together, and the computer goes through a final scoring process. And it's set on a very select, established, well-established set of rules, where an item that was of a higher level goes through an iterative review for that student on that item to determine the proportion of a score they get based on whether it was a difficult item or a lower item. That determines how you end up getting a cumulative scale score that puts that student on a higher level to a lower level. So that by going through the on the fly by the computer at the time with the human scoring plus this pulling it all together, that gives you a weighted score that is absolutely, totally defensible, that allows for a student to find their place on a selective scale. And that scale becomes the basis of how you then determine whether a student has reached proficiency or not. And incidentally, every test item in a pool finds its natural home on that same scale. So there is a natural movement forward from the lowest, the least difficult to the most difficult items are on that part of the scale, where a student is on theirs, fits on that very same scale, and it reflects incredibly well the overall ability of the student to achieve the increasingly difficult nature of items until they reach their natural plateau and they are not able to achieve as much above. That's how you get your scoring. That's how all that stuff ties together.
Is Smarter Balanced, the current assessment in North Dakota, a computer-based test or a computer-adapted test?
It will depend somewhat on a vendor and its ability to administer it.
The current
one we have is a computer-adaptive test working off of a predefined algorithm established by Smarter Balanced. and through what's called the test integration system, the rules that determine how the final score itself is brought together. Every vendor can provide its own unique kind of supports to that, their own unique value that they can add, but effectively it's built on the same comparable system.
But two students sitting next to each other might take different exams. Two fourth graders could be sitting next to each other taking two different exams in terms of different questions, versus a computer-based test, which might be two fourth graders sitting next to taking the identical assessment, even though it's on the computer.
Correct. A computer-based one, you'll take the whole same thing.
Yeah.
A computer adaptive, more than likely, students will approximate close to a 70% similar experience. The other 30%, if you want to put it that way, is going to be dependent on where the student was in their ability to meet the item, and that will then fine line their placement on the scale. Well, what you're going to get, a computer-based test and an adaptive will have comparable ability to perform, similar scale. When you take a look at measures of error, which is inside baseball talk, it gets you to fine lining it at a perhaps more precise basis with a computer adaptive.
Okay.
It's rich for debate,
Yep.
but it's a fairly well-established science.
Sounds good. Thanks, Craig.
So
So,
didn't the guy tell us like 12 questions probably off the test were different for kids?
In the neighborhood, it
There was
could be.
36 questions, 24 were similar, 12 were different.
Every kid will
Something like
take a
that?
test that should be comparably aligned to the content.
Yep.
They might get a slightly different variation of a question,
Yep.
but that's based on need. But when you get done, every student will have been tested against an effectively similar, aligned
Right.
test.
yep.
So you have assurances it's an apples-to-apples comparison.
Right. Thanks, Craig. Let's move to the high school and have a similar conversation. Content, reading and math. You know, the high school content is an interesting one because states all around the country do a lot of different things here. End-of-course exams are not uncommon. You know, obviously the state assessments, some states have replaced the state assessment with ACT. So you have a lot more options, it seems like, at the high school level. I think the discussion in December was really about, listen, if it's going to be a state assessment, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to meet the federal requirements and stay with reading and math and not get into a lot of other areas like end-of-course exams or other areas. So that was the general consensus, was to stay with reading and math, which met the federal requirements. The question will be, as was noted earlier, 8th grade and 11th grade, currently the science assessment grades, are those the right two grades? Once again, 11th grade would be the same year as ACT, right? So you're tending to mirror the science assessment with probably the busiest 3 grade levels of assessments right now in North Dakota. So if you want to make some changes there, that would be your choice. And then under the assessment component, that's where we're going to get into the idea, again, in your afternoon discussions on roll-alike, is ACT enough? And we're going to hear from Lisa Johnson right after lunch from the university system to talk about that. Her comments may inform you a bit more going forward about, is ACT enough? Or do we need ACT and a state assessment at the high school level so that we can make better decisions about students and universities and post-secondary institutions can make better decisions about students? And that's, again, back to our design work that we're going to have to do. And then there was some reference to work keys and the importance of that and integrating that into a high school assessment suite. You can talk about that this afternoon. Is it something you think the state should advocate for? And if so, why? And then the last one, obviously Lisa is going to provide some input. So the high school is going to be the most challenging one, I think, this afternoon for you to sort of get consensus around if you can get that at your roll-alike group.
And I'm just going to address that question too. I know on the listserv, there was a question or a comment that there was great consensus about using ACT as the high school assessment, and I'm very excited about that, and I'm pleased. And that's generally the direction that I'd like to go to, especially eliminate, or the direction that I want to go is to make sure that we can reduce the amount of testing that our 11th graders do. And then there was a comment that said I had kind of thrown cold water on that. Not at all. Not at all. I mean, I've thought this, and I've thought I wanted to look into this and explore this a great deal as well. I just wanted to make sure that before we make that decision, that we knew the direction that our colleges were going to go, our university system was going to go, so we didn't make that decision in isolation. The other thing that I want, that I have that we as a task force and we as a state should really make sure that we're talking all the same things. There are terms that are thrown around a lot that is standards aligned, standards based, and college and career ready standards. And so our state standards aren't the same as some other state standards, but so standard based means that it's based on the standards, but we're not sure if that student is getting that standard. It's all going to be standards, and so it's for a nation. It's all going to be standards. It could be a standard that they learn in 6th grade one time, but ACT may choose to assess it at 5th grade. And so what is required in our state law is that our state test is standards aligned and not just standards based. And ACT is a very well-trusted company that has been around for a long time. But even the states that are using the ACT, and we've asked this question a lot, could you show us the standards alignment, because that's what's required by our state law. And thus far, we've been having a very challenging time getting the ACT to be forthcoming with which standards the standards alignment is. And so before we go into that, I want to make sure that there is all of that transparency that is necessary to and not, this isn't federal law, this is state law, that our test is standards aligned. And and there have been correlation studies that they have done, I understand, that does the correlation for standards alignment, but they're not required to turn those studies over to us. And we as states have been having a very hard time getting the results of those studies. So we're working with the ACT because we want to make sure that we have all the information in front of us. And that's all that I was saying was, before we jump in, let's make sure that we have those studies, that we understand if we are teaching it in 5th grade, that is what our students will be assessed on. Or if we're teaching it, and if it's in the 11th grade test, is it based on our standards, or is it just college and career? They say they're a college entrance exam. And so not necessarily a standards aligned exam, but they're a college entrance exam. And that may be enough for us. That may be enough for us to choose our 11th grade exam as a college entrance exam. We heard from Tommy Weiss, my colleague from Alabama, a respected colleague. I really, really respect Tommy, and I think what he's doing in Alabama really is worth looking into for us as North Dakota. But there is a part of the requirement in order for it to be accepted as a state assessment that it must be reviewed, a peer review process to make sure, and that's peers, other teachers, college people that are reviewing to make sure that their test is actually aligned to their standards. So they're going through that process. So he just wanted me to make sure that I knew that they haven't cleared the hurdle to actually have ACT or ACT Aspire as their state assessment, because they too are trying to find out from ACT what their test bank of questions are and whether those test questions are really aligned to what their state standards are. So that's just any questions, and so I truly do want to explore that and make sure, but I need to make sure that it is a standards aligned as our state law requires.
Is the reason you're having such a hard time showing that is they don't want the test?
Well,
are they afraid the questions are going to get out?
No, it's not the test questions. We're just looking for the study. We would just like to see the correlation
I think the
study.
states could give them their curriculum and they could.
Right.
Yes,
And that's what we've done.
Okay.
And so we've done that, and so I can't speak to why, but no, we don't want to see their test. We just want to see the results of what that correlation study is.
Again, just clarification, when you say standards, do you mean Common Core?
No, our North Dakota standards, both in our science, math, English. Well, it's our North Dakota standards, so, and it would be Minnesota standards, Alabama standards,
Right.
just what is the
That's
correlation?
not Common Core.
I'm not sure.
When you say standards, you're not saying Common Core standards.
Well,
You're not meaning that.
no, I'm not meaning as a general, just a state standards.
And then real quick, the ACT, when we're talking about ACT, are we comparing that, is that kind of in the same category as what SBAC is, Smarter Balance is, or, right?
ACT has their own
So it's
test
kind-
bank
it's
of
kind of like-
questions. Yep.
In effect, it's sort of ACT versus Smarter Balance. It's not ACT versus a vendor, right? Okay.
ACT is the vendor,
But it's
and
also the.
it's also the testing
asset.
question.
What do you call that category? Asset-based?
Yes,
Asset-based.
exactly, exactly. So yes, and so that's, I don't have access to, and our teachers didn't contribute to ACT, but they're very well respected and very long tradition. So, yes, Jim.
So when you talk about alignment, standards alignment, would it mean that it's grade level specific then? Pretty much?
Yes. Joe?
Question, just to clarify in my mind, we are talking about ACT only for the high school, which is 11th grade, which is required for college.
It's not required for colleges.
It's not, well, okay, but normally it's taken, so that has a purpose. It gives the students accountability, which doesn't exist with any other of the tests. But you mentioned 4th grade, 5th grade, so the others were ACT. Are we looking at ACT as an all or nothing method? In other words, we're taking all of your testing?
The meeting
Or
that
are we talking about just the 11th grade?
The meeting that you weren't at, Tommy Bice from Alabama shared with us that they do ACT and ACT Aspire.
For just the 11th grade? Or
No,
that's
ACT
everyone?
Aspire is the suite that they use 3 through 8.
Okay, so now are we discussing the 3 through 8, or are we talking about just the 11th grade?
You know,
For the sake of this slide, it's just 11th grade. When North Dakota puts out their RFP, ACT might choose to bid on the North Dakota State Assessment and say, we can do it all for you. 3 through 8 and grade 11. And then North Dakota would have to decide, do we want ACT or do we want some other vendor to provide that? But for today's discussion, we're going to be talking about grade 11. Should ACT be the only assessment, or should it be ACT and a state test book?
And the side question to that is, what about the SAT, either in addition to or instead of the ACT, because that's also valid college?
I think North Dakota's been living in the ACT world, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't
Right.
change. So, question?
I just want to get back to that essential question of science testing, if we can. We are today talking about where we may want to move those tests, right?
Right.
For 8 and 11.
Right.
And so as a high school teacher, I know that 11th grade is probably the best place to take that test because they take physical science, biology, chemistry, they're right in the mode. And so if we were to move it, it would
Earlier.
be either, right, earlier they haven't had chemistry, later many of our students haven't had science then, because a lot of them aren't taking it anymore in their senior year. I'm wondering from those of you who work with elementary students, what age or what grade level do you think would be best if you were to move it from 4 and 8? Where would you want to see it moved? Before, after, what? Based on curriculum, standard, whatever.
I think you could put it.
They're going to have to change the way the test is written. I can't use the same test that I'm giving my 8th graders. If I'm going to move it to 7th grade because you wouldn't be having the same content. That's my try.
in elementary, you can't back it up. Fifth grade, you know.
And some of the schools have 6, 7, 8.
It would matter because you're required to give one in elementary, middle school, and high school.
I would be doing both in my middle school if I knew. Since I have 5 through 8. My
Yeah,
middle
5
school.
through 8.
Right, and I guess that's the thing is, I'm not so certain on the, what is considered elementary and middle school. I guess that's where it gets a little tricky is where is the dividing line between elementary and middle school?
Each school needs to, at the beginning of each year, declare how they're
Grade
configured.
span? Yeah.
So we have some schools that have declared they are in elementary K-4, and their middle is 5 through 8.
So if that was the case and they're K-4, are they obligated then to give it in 4th grade?
Because they need once in elementary, once in middle.
So then I would kind of stop.
We would, we could take a look at, see how many of our schools are configured K-4 for elementary, to see how many that would impact. How many of our schools are configured K or 5-8 would probably be the better question.
So they couldn't change the test and give a 3rd grade level test in science. So they have to do the same.
They could. Oh, yes, they could. Absolutely, they could. But then it would need to be all. But they were saying not to back it up. I'm hearing from elementary teachers that they'd rather move it forward. But if we moved it forward, then we're going to have some.
Schools that aren't testing
I think it's perfectly permissible for a state to define the levels it wishes. It's conceivable you could go with a grade 3, a grade 7, a grade 10 as a scenario of it. It comes to how you build that test to be defensible that a student would have been exposed to the material and that the material was in fact appropriately aligned to the standards. That's a key component part of that. And one last statement about the ACT. The ACT's definition of alignment is based on the ACT's business model, which has been well established for years and is the foundation of its scale. So it's putting itself in terms of what it has as it's defined its curriculum-based alignment based on their perspective. And the biggest issue that we have, does that equal what a state has defined in its own standards, which a state must do, and then work with vendors to have as clean an alignment as it possibly can. So it's a sticky issue, it's a definitional issue, it's an issue of transparency.
Can I ask just clarification, if I would say this? So ACT has defined what it is, defined the curriculum that should be taught at 5th, 4th, 3rd, and then aligned their test questions to their curriculum, and that's what they offer. And then we have to see if our alignment can match that or adjust our curriculum to what ACT has determined should be taught at 5th grade. And that's just my concern.
How did she do, Greg? How did she do?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Let me summarize it this way. When a state declares its standards, it builds its test on those standards.
Yeah.
If you move with a vendor who has a pre-established package, you are acceding to that package, which may or may not align to your standards. And that becomes the real issue in terms of peer review. To what degree has the state put itself in a pickle by not providing an assessment that's properly aligned? To what degree has the state made itself vulnerable by not serving the students well, by using a different criteria against which to measure those students?
Well stated. That's a good example.
And that's why I feel when the teachers came together that I felt that our teachers should set the standards. That's why we spent that 2.5 years going through and why we're going to re-examine our standards again, because traditionally since the 80s, our teachers have determined what the standards are, contrary to what some people think. And I believe that our teachers should decide what our standards should be, and then we build that test versus us fitting into what a pre-existing test says.
Just going back to Senator Pullman's question on when should we do science, when I looked at the Education Commission report from the different states, there are a lot of them that do grades 5 and 8, and I don't know if they can do that, why we can't do 5 and 8 also. I mean, there's no reason why it has to be defined as middle school, lower elementary, upper elementary, junior high, or however you're. I think high school is 9 through 12. Right. I think all the rest is elementary.
Yeah.
Okay, just 2 comments on the science. Visiting with our high school science teachers, if the science test is moved to 10th